Boston, one and all. You are hereby respectfully cautioned and advised to avoid conversing with the watchmen and police officers of Boston. For since the recent order of the mayor and aldermen, they are empowered to act as kidnappers and slave catchers. They have already been employed in kidnapping, catching, and keeping slaves. Therefore, if you value your liberty and welfare of the fugitives among you, shun them in every possible manner as so many hounds on the track of the most unfortunate of your race. Keep a sharp lookout for kidnappers and have top eye open. Public broadside notice, April 24, 1851.
During the War for Independence in the late 1700s, there was a lack of able-bodied white men, and it became acceptable to enlist black slaves and free blacks into the Massachusetts militia. The Bucks of America, one of several all-black regiments from Massachusetts, was created in 1778. In all-black and integrated units, slaves often were promised freedom in exchange for their services. Felix Cuff, an enslaved man from Waltham, enlisted as a private in Captain Zacchaeus Wright's integrated company on August 7th, 1780. 2 years after the increasing lack of able-bodied white men made the acceptance of armed slaves and free blacks a necessity. Just a few days after Cuff enlisted, a Waltham resident named Edward Gearfield claimed that he owned Cuff. He gathered a small company of men and snatched Cuff out of the army encampment. In response, a letter arrived from the Waltham Town Selectmen and was delivered to Major General William Heath.
Honorable Sir, we the subscribers look upon it as our duty to inform your honor of the truth of Felix Cuff being engaged for this town, for the militia, for 3 months, as we are persuaded, had your honor been rightly informed, therefore your honor would not have permitted Edward Gearfield to have taken the said Felix Cuff and his arms and accoutrement. The reason, your honor alleges, is that the said Felix Cuff was clandestinely taken when the said Gearfield was from home, which must arise from misinformation, for the said Edward Gearfield was at home when Felix engaged, and we are persuaded that he may not pretend he has no demand in justice on the said Felix as a slave, whatever he may pretend by any pretended bill of sale.
Oh, well read, sir. But, if I may ask, what does it all mean?
Oh, well, look, it means, see, right here, it means the selectmen of Waltham were attesting that Cuff did not sneak away from Garfield's confinement, but joined of his own free will. Gearfield, they said, was being so greedy, he wouldn't even return the uniforms and supplies he stole along with Cuff. Yeah, listen further. His arms and accoutrements are the town's. The clothes the said Felix Cuff now has were procured by him with the money the town paid him to engage in said service. The said Edward Gearfield likewise now refuses to deliver the arms and accoutrement, though he is sensible. They are the town's, and never were either his or Felix's property. As the said Felix Cuff is desirous of returning to the army with Lieutenant Hastings, and is a here healthy fellow, induces us to countenance the return, notwithstanding your honour's furlough. Supposing it be our duty till your honour should be acquainted with the truth thereof. We are your honour's most obedient and humble servants, etc., etc. Abraham Pierce, letter to Major General William Heath, August 7th, 1780.
I apprehend Waltham supporter the claim that Cuff was free to join on his own word. So, Cuff was taken from Gearfield and returned to his army unit. Gearfield sued, and the town of Waltham defended the soldiers and refused Gearfield's claim. Thank you. Then a different letter was delivered to General Hastings.
In obedience to your honour's order of the 23rd of this instant, respecting the black man by the name of Felix Cuff, in Colonel Howe's regiment, agreeable to the above order of the 23rd, I have inquired into the matter and have heard all the evidence that can be produced on both sides. It appears that Felix Cuff is the property of Edward Gearfield, and find that he was taken by point of bayonet and brought by Lieutenant Hastings by order of the committee and select men of the town of Waltham into camp, and with your honour's permission shall discharge the said Felix Cuff and deliver him to his master. Colonel John Jacobs' letter to Major General Heath, August 26, 1780.
With the threat that Colonel Jacobs would return him to Gearfield's enslavement, Cuff and at least 2 other black men, either former soldiers like himself or local slaves, who ran away to join him, hid in a cave known to locals as Devil's Den, refusing to return to slavery. I ask, what do you know of Devil's Den?
Dean Derry, De Vincent's. Here we go. Oh, listen to this. Devil's Den. A hill of some 40 acres comprised of immense boulders, deep and perilous chasms, all covered with a venerable growth of oak and walnut, 100 feet back from and perhaps 60 above the grade of the country road leading into Weston. This is the entrance to the Devil's Den, a huge subterranean chamber some 20 feet in depth. Under this hill, which tradition says was the abiding place of the evil one, in the days when old Nick is said to have perambulated this mundane planet. 19th century Waltham newspaper article, The Devil's Den.
Lieutenant Eliphalet Hastings learned where Cuff was hiding and, acting on Colonel Jacobs' orders, attempted to capture Cuff and return him to Gearfield. He went with a party of young men to capture Cuff and his associates, but he didn't succeed.
Good.
Charles A. Nelson, in Waltham, past present, 1882, reported, Hastings met with a warm reception and came back empty-handed. Cuff emerged from the cave long enough to file charges against Hastings and his men, accusing them of incitement to riot. In September 1781, Hastings requested for the town money to defend him against the charges, was rebuffed by Waltham selectmen.
Well done, Waltham. Well done.
Well done. Cuff went on to collect wages for his services in the war. Massachusetts paid Cuff £1,500 in colonial currency and 60 bushels of corn for his services.
Now, it's unclear what happened to Cuff after this payment, and he fades from the historical record. Following the Revolutionary War, there was a building on the east corner of Moody Street, occupied by Felix Cuff, a colored man, in the employ of John Boyce, the papermaker. Charles A. Nelson, Waltham Past and Present, 1882.
By 1835, Waltham was becoming safe ground for organizing anti-slave activity, with publications like The Liberator and the formation of the Waltham Anti-Slavery Society. In the spring of 1835, meetings were held at a tavern along the Great Road.
Dear sir, supposing a slave makes his escape from his master and comes in Waltham, and I assist him in getting still further from his master, so that he finally gets to Canada or anywhere else beyond his master's reach. Can that master recover at law the amount of the slave from me, provided I am worth it? I.e., have I or have I not a lawful right to assist a runaway slave retain his freedom? An answer to this inquiry, either by letter directed to DMG of Waltham or in the next week's Liberator, will be received with favor by a friend of all humanity. The Liberator, November 1835.
In 1841, the Boston Vigilance Committee, In 1841, the Boston Vigilance Committee was formed in response to a public call by abolitionist Charles Turner Torrey. A constitution was adopted that same evening. The first article, which stated, excuse me, the object of this association shall be to secure to persons of color the enjoyment of their constitutional and legal rights. To secure this object, it will employ every legal, peaceful, and Christian method, and none other. Boston Vigilance Committee resolved June 4th, 1841.
Waltham, 1844, Frederick Douglass delivers a speech to the Vigilance Committee and abolitionist supporters. In 1852, again, here in Waltham, he delivers a stunning July 4th speech, which you are privileged to attend. Here and now.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, abolitionists, selectmen, dignitaries, and friends, we have the privilege and honor to hear tonight from a most distinguished speaker, author, abolitionist, freed from that most heinous state of slavery. Pray you be understanding and welcome Mr. Frederick Douglass.
Friends and fellow citizens, the task before me is one which requires much previous thought and study for its proper performance. The papers and placards say that I am to deliver a 4th of July oration. This certainly sounds large and out of the common way, for it is true that I have often had the privilege to speak in this beautiful hall and to address many who now honor me with their presence. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here today is to me a matter of astonishment as well as gratitude. For this purpose of this celebration is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This, to you, is what the Passover was to be to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life and reminds you that the Republic of America is 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. You are, even now, only in the beginning of your national career, still lingering in the period of childhood. I repeat, I am glad this is so. There is hope in the thought, and hope is much needed under the dark clouds which lower above the horizon. Fellow citizens, the simple story is that 76 years ago, the people of this country were British subjects. The style and title of your sovereign people, in which you now glory, was not then yet born. You are under the British crown. Your fathers esteemed the English government as the home government, England as the fatherland, although a considerable distance from your home, imposed in the exercise of its parental prerogatives upon its colonial children such restraints, burdens, and limitation as in its mature judgment it deemed wise, right, and proper. But your fathers, who had not adopted the idea of the infallibility of government and the absolute character of its acts, presumed to differ from the home government in respect to the wisdom and the justice of those burdens and restraints. They went so far as to pronounce measures of government that were unjust, unreasonable, and oppressive, and altogether such as not to be quietly submitted to. I scarcely need say, fellow citizens, that my opinion of those measures fully accords with that of your fathers, feeling themselves harshly and unjustly treated by the home government. Your fathers, like men of honesty and men of spirit, earnestly sought redress. They petitioned, they remonstrated. They did so in a decorous, respectful, and loyal manner. This, however, did not answer the purpose. They saw themselves treated with sovereign indifference, coldness, and scorn. Oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victim of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there is always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of total separation from the colonies, from the crown, was born. It was a startling idea, much more so than we, at this distance of time, regard it. The timid and the prudent of the day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. Their opposition to then dangerous thought was earnest and powerful, but amid all of their terror and affrighted vociferations against it, the alarming and revolutionary idea moved on, and the country with it. On the 2nd of July, 1776, the Old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshippers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all the authority of the national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. we seldom hit upon resolutions drawn up in our day whose transparency is at all equaled, resolved that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British crown. Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded, and today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you therefore may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history. The very ring bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny. Fellow citizens, I am not wanting in respect for the fathers of this republic. The signers of the declarations were brave men. I cannot contemplate their great deeds with less than admiration. They were statesmen, patriots, and heroes, and for the good they did and the principles they contended for, I will unite with you to honor their memory. They loved their country better than their own private interests, and all will concede that it is a rare virtue that ought to command respect. He who will intelligently lay down his life for his country is a man whom it is not in human nature to despise. Your fathers staked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor on the cause of their country. They were peacemen, but they preferred revolution to peaceful submission to bondage. They were quiet men, but they did not shrink from agitating against oppression. They showed forbearance, but they knew its limits. They believed in order, but not in the order of tyranny. With them, nothing was settled that was not right. With them, justice, liberty, and humanity were final, not slavery and oppression. You may well cherish the memory of such men. They were great in their day and generation. Their solid manhood stands out the more as we contrast it with these degenerate times. How circumspect, exact, and proportionate were all of their movements. How unlike the politicians of an hour. Their statesmanship looked beyond the passing moment and stretched away in strength to the distant future. Fully appreciating the hardship to be encountered, firmly believing in the right of their cause, wisely measuring the terrible odds against them. Your fathers, the fathers of this republic, laid the cornerstone of the national superstructure, which has risen and still rises in grandeur all around you. Of this fundamental work, this day is the anniversary. My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God and his cause is the ever-living now. We have to do with the past only as we can make it useful to the present and to the future. Now is the time, the important time. Your fathers have lived, died, and have done their work, and have done much of it well. You live and must die. You must do your work. You have no right to enjoy a child's share in the labor of your fathers unless your children are to be blessed by your labors. You have no right to wear out and waste the hard-earned fame of your fathers to cover your indolence. Fellow citizens, pardon me, allow me to ask, why am I called upon here to speak today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? And am I therefore called upon to bring our humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express the devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Would to God, for both your sakes and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then my task would be light and my burden easy and delightful. But such is not the case. I say it with a sad sense of the disparity between us. I am not included with the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, but not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July of yours is not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn, to drag a man in fetters into the grand, illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? Fellow citizens, above your national tumultuous joy, I hear the mournful wail of millions, whose chains, heavy and grievous yesterday, are today rendered more intolerable by the jubilee that shouts that reach them. My subject then, fellow citizens, is American slavery. I shall see this day from the slave's point of view. Standing here, identified with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine, I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July. Whether we turn to the declarations of the past or to the professions of the present, the conduct of the nation seems equally hideous and revolting. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds itself to be false to the future. Standing with God and the crushed and the bleeding slave on this occasion, I will, in the name of humanity, which is outraged, and the name of liberty, which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible, which are disregarded, guarded, trampled upon, dare to call into question and to denounce with all the emphasis I can command everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will use the severest language I can command. And yet not one word shall escape me that any man whose judgment is not blinded by prejudice or is not at heart a slave holder shall not confess to be right and just. I fancy I hear some of my audience say it is just in this circumstance that you and your brother abolitionists fail to make a favorable impression on the public mind. Would you argue more and denounce less? Would you persuade more and rebuke less? Your cause, which would be much more likely to succeed. But I submit, where all is plain, there is nothing to be argued. What point in the anti-slavery creed would you have me argue? Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man? The slaveholders themselves acknowledge it in the enactment of their laws for the government. They acknowledge it when they punish disobedience on the part of the slave. There are 72 crimes in the state of Virginia which, if committed by a black man, subject him to the punishment of death, while only 2 of the same crimes will subject a white man to like punishment. What is this but the acknowledgement that the slave is a moral, intellectual, and responsible being? Southern statute books are covered with enactments forbidding, under severe fines and penalties, the teaching of slaves to read or write. When you can point to any such laws in reference to the beasts of the field, then I may consent to argue the manhood of the slave. When the dogs in your streets, when the fowls of the air, when the cattle on your hills, when the fish of the sea, and the reptiles that crawl shall be unable to distinguish the slave from a brute, then I will argue that a slave is a man. For the present, is it enough to affirm the equal manhood of the Negro race? Is it not astonishing that while we are plowing, planting, and reaping using all kinds of mechanical tools, erecting houses, constructing bridges, building ships, working in the metals of brass, iron, copper, silver, and gold, that while we are reading, writing, and ciphering, acting as clerks, merchants, and secretaries, having among us lawyers, doctors, ministers, poets, authors, editors, orators, and teachers, that while we are engaged in all manner of enterprises common to other men, digging gold in California, or capturing the whale in the Pacific, feeding sheep and cattle on the hillside, living, moving, acting, thinking, planning, living in families as husbands, wives, and children, and above all, confessing and worshiping the Christian's God, and looking hopefully for life and immortality beyond the grave, we are called upon to prove that we are men. Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his own body? You've already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? Is it to be settled by the rules of logic and argumentation? As a matter beset with great difficulty, involving a doubtful application of the principles of justice, hard to be understood? How should I look today in the presence of Americans to show that men have a natural right to freedom? To do so would be to make myself ridiculous and to offer insult to your understanding. There is not a man beneath the canopy of heaven that does not know that slavery is wrong for him. What? Am I to argue that it is wrong to make men brutes, to rob them of their liberty, to work them without wages, to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to beat them with sticks, to flay their flesh with the lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to sell them at auction, to sunder their families, to knock out their teeth, burn their flesh, starve them into obedience in submission to their masters? Must I argue that a system thus marked with blood and stained with pollution is wrong? No, I will not. I have better employments for my time and strength than such arguments would imply. What then remains to be argued? Is it that slavery is not divine? That God did not establish it? That our doctors of divinity are mistaken? There is blasphemy in the thought. That which is inhuman cannot be divine. Who can reason on such a proposition? I cannot. The time for such argument is past. At a time like this, scorching irony, not convincing argument is needed. Oh, had I the ability, I could reach the nation's ear. I would today pour out a fiery stream of biting ridicule, blasting reproach, withering sarcasm, and stern rebuke. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. And its crimes against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and your thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. Go where you may, search where you will, roam through all the monarchies and despotisms of the old world, search out every abuse. And when you have found the last, lay your facts by the side of the everyday practices of this nation, and you will say with me that, for revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival. Take the American slave trade, which is especially prosperous just now, and carried on in all the large towns and cities in one half of this Confederacy. In several states, this trade is a chief source of wealth. It is called the internal slave trade, in order to divert it from the horror with which the foreign slave trade is contemplated. That trade has long since been denounced by this government as piracy, as an execrable traffic. To arrest it, this nation keeps a squadron at immense cost on the coast of Africa. Everywhere in this country, it is safe to speak of this foreign slave trade as a most inhuman traffic, opposed alike to the laws of God and man. It is, however, a notable fact. While so much execration is poured out by Americans upon those engaged in the foreign slave trade, the men engaged in the slave trade between the states pass without condemnation, and the business is deemed honorable. Behold the practice operation of this internal slave trade, the American slave trade, sustained by American politics and American religion. Here you will see men and women reared like swine for the market. You know what is a swine drover? I will show you a man drover. They inhabit all our southern states. They perambulate the country and crowd the highways of this nation with droves of human stock. You will see one of these human flesh jobbers armed with pistol, whip, and bowie knife, driving a company of 100 men, women, and children from the Potomac to the slave market at New Orleans. These wretched people are to be sold singly or in lots to suit purchasers. They are food for the cotton field and the deadly sugar mill. Mark the sad procession as it moves wearily along and the inhuman wretch that drives them. Hear his savage yells and his blood-chilling oaths as he hurries his affrighted captives. There, see the old man with locks thinned and gray. Cast one glance, if you please, to that young mother whose shoulders are bare to the scorching sun, her briny tears falling on the brow of the babe in her arms. See, too, that girl of 13 weeping, yes, weeping, as she thinks of the mother from whom she has been torn. The drove moves tardily. Heat and sorrow have nearly consumed their strength. Suddenly you hear a quick snap. The discharge of a rifle, the fetters clank, and the chain rattles simultaneously. Your ears are saluted with a scream that seems to have torn its way to the center of your soul. The crack you heard was the sound of the slave whip. The scream you heard was from the woman you saw with the babe. Her speed had faltered under the weight of a child and her chains. That gash on her shoulder tells her to move on. Follow the drove to New Orleans. Attend the auction. See men examined like horses. See forms of women rudely and brutally exposed to the shocking gaze of American slave buyers. See this drove sold and separated forever. Never forget the deep, sad sobs that arose from that scattered multitude. Tell me, citizens, where, under the sun, can you witness a spectacle more fiendish and shocking? But this is but a glance at the American slave trade as it exists at this moment in the United States. Fellow citizens, this murderous traffic is today in active operation in this boasted republic. In the solitude of my spirit, I see clouds of dust raised in the highways of the South. I see the bleeding footsteps. I hear the doleful wail of fettered humanity on the way to the slave markets where the victims are to be sold like horses, sheep, and swine, knocked off to the highest bidder. There I see the tenderest ties ruthlessly broken to gratify the lust, caprice, and rapacity of the buyers and sellers of men. By an act of the American Congress, not 2 years old, slavery has been nationalized in its most horrible and revolting form. Mason and Dixon's line has been obliterated. New York has become as Virginia, and the power to hold, hunt, and sell men, women, and children as slaves remains no longer a mere state institution, but now is an institution of the whole United States. The power is coextensive with the Star-Spangled Banner and American Christianity. Where these go, may also go the merciless slave hunter. Where these are, man is not sacred. He is a bird for the sportsman's gun. By the most foul and fiendish of all human decrees, the liberty and person of every man are put in peril. Your broad Republican domain is hunting ground for men. Your lawmakers have commanded that all good citizens to engage in this hellish sport. Your president, your Secretary of State enforce as a duty you owe to your free and glorious country and to your God. You do this accursed thing. Not fewer than 40 Americans have, within the past 2 years, been hunted down without a moment's warning, hurried away in chains, and consigned to slavery and excruciating torture. Some of these have had wives and children, dependent on them for bread, but of this no account was made. The right of the hunter to his prey stands superior to the right of marriage and to all rights in this republic, the rights of God included. For black men, there are neither law nor justice, humanity nor religion. The fugitive slave law makes mercy to them a crime and bribes the judge who tries them. An American judge gets $10 for every victim he consigns to slavery, and $5 when he fails to do so. The oath of any two villains is sufficient under this hell-black enactment to send the most pious and exemplary black man into the remorseless jaws of slavery. His own testimony is nothing. He can bring no witnesses for himself. The minister of American justice is bound by the law to hear but one side. And that side is the side of the oppressor. Let this damning fact be perpetually told. Let it be thundered around the world that in tyrant-killing, king-hating, people-loving, democratic Christian America, the seats of justice are filled with judges who hold their offices under an open and palpable bribe, and are bound in deciding the case of a man's liberty only to hear his accusers. In glaring violation of justice and shameless disregard of the forms of administering law, in cunning arrangement to entrap the defenseless, and in diabolical intent, this fugitive slave law stands alone in the annals of tyrannical legislation. Americans, your Republican politics, not less than your Republican religion, are flagrantly inconsistent. Your boast of your love of liberty, your superior civilization, and your pure Christianity, while the whole political power of the nation is solemnly pledged to support and perpetuate the enslavement of 3 million of your countrymen. You hurl your anathemas at the crowned-headed tyrants of Russia and Austria, and pride yourselves on your democratic institutions, while you yourselves consent to be the mere tools and bodyguards of the tyrants of Virginia and Carolina. You invite your shores fugitives of oppressions from abroad, honor them with banquets, greet them with ovations, cheer them, toast them, salute them, protect them, and pour out your money to them like water. But fugitives from your own land you advertise, hunt, arrest, shoot, and kill. Your discourse, eloquently on the dignity of labor, yet you sustain a system which in its very essence casts a stigma upon labor. You can bare your bosom to the storm of British artillery to throw off a 3-penny tax on tea, and yet wring the last hard-earned farthing from the grasp of the black laborers of your country. You profess to believe that of one blood God made all the nations of men to dwell on the face of all the earth, and hath commanded all men everywhere to love one another, yet you notoriously hate and glory in your own hatred all men whose skins are not colored like your own. You declare before the world, and are understood by the world to declare, that you hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And yet, you hold securely in a bondage which, according to your own Thomas Jefferson, is worse than ages of that which your fathers rose in rebellion to oppose. A 7th part of the inhabitants of your country. Fellow citizens, I will not enlarge further on your national inconsistencies. The existence of slavery in this country brands your republicanism as a sham, your humanity as a base pretense, and your Christianity as a lie. It destroys your moral power abroad. It corrupts your politicians at home. It saps the foundation of religion. It makes your name a hissing and a byword to a mocking earth. Be warned. A horrible reptile is coiled up in your nation's bosom. The venomous creature is nursing at the tender breast of your youthful republic. For the love of God, tear away and fling from your hideous monster, and let the weight of 20 millions crush and destroy it forever. Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented on the state of this nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work to the downfall of slavery. I therefore leave off where I began, with hope. While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. Nations do not now stand in the same relation to each other that they did ages ago. No nation can now shut itself up from the surrounding world and trot around the same old path of its fathers without interference. The time when such could be done. But a change has now come over the affairs of mankind. Walled cities and empires have become unfashionable. The arm of commerce has borne away the gates of the strong city. Intelligence is penetrating the darkest corners of the globe. Wind, steam, and lightning are its chartered agents. Oceans no longer divide but link nations together. From Boston to London is now a holiday excursion. This space is comparatively annihilated. Thoughts expressed on one side of the Atlantic are now distinctly heard on the other. In the fervent aspirations of William Lloyd Garrison, I say, and let every heart, every voice join in saying it.
In your program, there is this poem. Please join with Mr. Douglas as we read through it. It begins, Godspeed.
Godspeed the day when human blood shall cease to flow. In every clime be understood the claims of human brotherhood, and each turn for evil good, not blow for blow. That day will come all feuds to end, and change into a faithful friend each foe. Ladies and gentlemen, you honor me with your presence. I thank you very much.
And when you say that you mostly did it like in hiding the speeches, who came to, was it mostly black people or white
Yes,
people?
it was mostly colored folk. They would come. My speeches were a little bit differently. It was many times I spent time encouraging them to know that there is hope, as I mentioned earlier, because many of them could not read or write. I actually spent a great deal of time telling them the conditions of different areas. If I've come down from New York to maybe Richmond, Virginia, or closer to Savannah, I would spend time, even sometime teaching, if in secret, some slaves and some former slaves to read and write.
And I wonder what the response was. Like the people after listening to you, did you see feelings of rage or unity?
Rage was not something I was unfamiliar with. I saw a lot of it because most people feel the same way I did. Unfortunately, they didn't necessarily have the power and sometimes the confidence to do anything about it, even if they were freed slaves.
Did some Bible believers protect you?
Yes, yes. Many of them were suffragettes. Many of them were white evangelicals that took the Bible at its word and were able to, at great risk, mind you. Remember that white abolitionists sometimes were treated just as bad as slaves in some cases, in some areas. This young lady here, and then this young man.
So, when your notoriety, I guess the question is, did your notoriety become celebrity in a sense? And were you sought after to give speeches later?
Mm-hmm.
And how did that affect your life? I know you were married more than once.
Yes.
And how did it affect your family?
I will admit there were some times when my family was less than supportive. And not because they did not care for me, but more or less because they were just tired of being constantly in danger. I believe the current vernacular is always looking over one's shoulder. It was something that even in my own home I had to continually convince my family to allow me to do. And over time, as my children got older, they understood the real plight of the slave. But I never wavered. I was always convinced that this is my divine purpose. I believe that I'm a good speaker, and many people feel the same way, so I'm fortunate.
Many of us have labored under the apparent myth that slavery was a purely Southern thing. How prevalent was slavery in the northern states?
It was less prevalent. That did not mean that blacks, coloreds were not mistreated. They were. I mean, the attitude, unfortunately, cannot be litigated or legislated, I should say. You would find that many people were actually quite treacherous in the North for financial reasons. They would actually trick even freed black men could be sold into slavery. There was laws that had supported that. So it was a difficult time because even in the North you had to be careful.
In Waltham in 1790, apparently, there were 19 black slaves. Most working for Edward Gearfield, whose home, whose estate was very much near the former Dean Dairies up on Warren Ave.
You said that you feel like what you do is a divine calling, but in your speech, you refer to Christianity as a lie. What is your position, like faith, your personal faith?
My faith, more or less, is that there is some higher power. I believe that. In me saying that Christianity is a lie, if you actually study God's Word, the Bible, while slavery is documented as a historical fact, the way you treat a slave, so to speak, which as modern time progresses, will change according to vernacular. Because remember that the Bible is translated from ancient Hebrew. So I feel that if you are a Christian and you support slavery, there is a gross inconsistency with your faith.
But do you have a personal faith, and how is faith used or lived out in the Black community?
Well, I do read the Bible. I believe that when you look at God's Word, it's pretty self-explanatory to be able to govern how you live. So I don't really rely on a man's interpretation. I'm fully capable of interpreting the Bible on my own. No. Sorry.
Doesn't the Bible mandate release of slaves after 7 years?
In the Old Testament, yes.
And would the colonial Christians, or did the colonial Christians view that as binding on them, on their community?
I cannot speak for those people because I don't know them. How they interpret the Bible, I would not actually have it. I know how I interpret the Bible. I would not know how they would. I would think that they would have a more modernistic view. The way I look at it is more as an employee-employer situation versus a slave, and because even the Bible says to not mistreat your slaves when you have them. I translate that hopefully someday as just a matter of employee-employer relationship.
It might have proven to be a very effective remedy against slavery, just to insist that Christians stick to the institution as it's described biblically. You could get everyone out after 7 years and keep them from being mistreated.
I wholeheartedly believe that. I would dare propagate that you would release your slaves ahead of time. Unless, if in some instances, slaves, what's not commonly known, in rare cases, slave owners are actually compassionate to their slaves. There are some slave owners that would gladly release their slaves if they thought they had a fair chance in the world. In some instances, it's rare, very rare, but I've met folks that, even they're abolitionists actually, who actually own slaves, but they don't consider themselves owners because they're trying to protect them. Because the world is not ready for all of the slaves to be released, I would dare, at one time. Society must change, the government must change in order for slaves to get their due, to be treated as equals. Okay? Human attitude does not change in a day, unfortunately.
Thank you all for attending and reflecting on Mr. Douglas' words. If you've enjoyed this day's program, if these words have touched you, please join the museum as a member and support us in bringing programs like this. We are an all-volunteer, nonprofit organization devoted to preserving and presenting the history of Waltham. We invite you to see a couple of things. Next to Mr. Douglas is an actual Civil War flag, and upon it, real slave fetters that were used primarily in Belmont to return slaves to Boston and into an unfortunate fate. Across the hall, we have our refreshments, and you may continue to talk to Mr. Douglas or Mr. Chester about his presentation today. Thank you all for coming.